Broadcasting from where the elven way from Holland ended, in Middle-earth, this is the Secret Fire Podcast, sent to burn at the heart of the world, episode number 34. I'm Michael.
And I'm Micah.
On this episode, the Gates of Moria have been opened. But what awaits the company in the dark of Khazad-dûm? And Sam must make a decision that we want to talk about. And we invite you to come along, join the fellowship, become a servant of the Secret Fire, each week, or not, here on the GCT network.
This is your Great Commission transmission.
It has been a month since the last episode, the previous episode, and because there has been a lot going on here in our lives that we'll talk about later on in the show, I want to jump into the discussion as quickly as we can so that those folks that aren't or maybe new to the show, they don't want to hear us jibber-jabbering. They want us to get into the content, and then if they like our jibber-jabbering, then perhaps they'll want to listen to us jibber-jab even more after the main body. Brendan is not with us again this week for the third time in a row. He was in the studio earlier today, though, Micah.
Yeah.
Because we did an episode of Finding Christ in Cinema, our other podcast, and then he had to get going. He's planning on being here next week.
Cool.
But you're leaving next week. So we got to get this ironed out.
Are we doing it Friday? We don't need to.
We'd have to do it on Thursday. So okay, let's.
Yeah.
Hey, did you have anything that you wanted to tack on to, any addendums or afterthoughts for our previous episode, Journey in the Dark Part 1?
Well, as I said last time, if I did, I've forgotten by now.
Yeah, it's been too long. We have to do these. We'll get back on track here pretty quickly, listeners. And thank you for you longtime listeners that have been on the journey with us for these past 34 episodes. Bear with us. We appreciate you sticking with us and giving us some grace here as we're getting all this busyness behind us. All right. Let's back up a couple of paragraphs or so and get a running start, because they've made their way, the company made their way to the Gates of Moria, but they ran into a little problem. Well, what was the problem?
You tell me.
Well, they couldn't remember how to get into the door. Couldn't understand.
There were several problems.
Yes, and Gandalf, remember, he says he can recall 200 spells right off the top of his the tip of his tongue. But none of them were working, and so you had to really think about this. So he's sitting there just deep in thought, and everybody's going crazy around him. And you got Boromir throwing, well, I hate this pool, he says, and he stooped and picking up a large stone, he cast it far into the water. The stone vanished with a soft slap, but at the same instant there was a swish and a bubble. Great rippling rings formed on the surface out beyond where the stone had fallen, and they moved slowly toward the foot of the cliff. "Why did you do that, Boromir?" says Frodo. "I hate this place too, and I'm afraid. I don't know of what. Not of wolves or of the dark behind the doors, but of something else. I'm afraid of the pool. Don't disturb it." "I wish we could get away," said Merry. "Why doesn't Gandalf do something quick?" said Pippin. Gandalf took no notice of them. He sat with his head bowed, either in despair or in anxious thought. The mournful howling of the wolves was heard again. The ripples on the water grew and came closer. Some were already lapping on the shore. With a suddenness that startled them all, the wizard sprang to his feet. He was laughing. "Ha! I have it!" he cried. Of course. Absurdly simple, like most riddles when you see the answer." Picking up his staff, he stood before the rock and said in a clear voice, "Melon." The star shone out briefly and faded again. Then silently a great doorway was outlined, though not a crack or joint had been visible before. Slowly it divided in the middle and swung outwards inch by inch until both doors lay back against the wall. Through the opening, a shadowy stair could be seen climbing steeply up. But beyond the lower steps, the darkness was deeper than the night. The company stared in wonder. "I was wrong after all," said Gandalf, "and Gimli too. Mary, of all people, was on the right track. The opening word was inscribed on the archway all the time. The translation should have been, say, friend, and enter. We spent time on that part there for the Christian themes for the last episode. I had only to speak the Elvish word for friend, and the doors opened. Quite simple, too simple for a learned lore master in these suspicious days. Those were happier times. Now let us go. Now we're all caught up. And you know what they say when you're on a journey.
Remember what Bilbo used to say? It's a dangerous business.
Frodo, going out your door, you step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to.
Where are we going to be swept off to this time? Ooh. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Let's go.
Let's dig in. He strode forward and set his foot on the lowest step. But at that moment, several things happened. Frodo felt something seize him by the ankle, and he fell with a cry. Bill the pony gave a wild neigh of fear and turned tail and dashed away along the lakeside into the darkness. Sam leaped after him, and then, hearing Frodo's cry, he ran back again, weeping and cursing. The others swung round and saw the waters of the lake seething as if a host of snakes were swimming up from the southern end. Out from the water, a long, sinuous tentacle had crawled. It was pale green and luminous and wet. Its fingered end had hold of Frodo's foot and was dragging him into the water. Sam, on his knees, was now slashing at it with a knife. The arm let go of Frodo, and Sam pulled him away, crying out for help. 20 other arms came rippling out. The dark water boiled, and there was a hideous stench. "Into the gateway! Up the stairs, quick!" shouted Gandalf, leaping back, rousing them from the horror that seemed to have rooted all but Sam to the ground where they stood. He drove them forward. Pay attention to Sam, what he's doing here. They were just in time. Sam and Frodo were only a few steps up, and Gandalf had just begun to climb when the groping tentacles writhed across the narrow shore and fingered the cliff wall and the doors. One came wriggling over the threshold, glistening in the starlight. Gandalf turned and paused. If he was considering what word would close the gate again from within, there was no need. Many coiling arms seized the door on either side and with horrible strength swung them round. With a shattering echo, they slammed and all light was lost. A noise of rending and crashing came dully through the ponderous stone. Are we in Moria right now?
We are indeed.
In Lotro, Lord of the Rings Online. That's the sounds that you listeners are hearing right now. Ooh, give it an immersive feel for this podcast. Sam, clinging to Frodo's arm, collapsed on a step in the black darkness. "Poor old Bill," he said in a choking voice. "Poor old Bill! Wolves and snakes!" But the snakes were too much for him. "I had to choose, Mr. Frodo. I had to come with you." What have we seen so far today about Sam?
He's heroic.
Well, that's one way to put it. He is heroic. And where everybody else seemed to be frozen in place, seeing this sight, he is acting.
When it comes to his master, nothing's going to stop him.
You know what? That is absolutely right. Sam had to choose. He had to choose between Bill and Frodo. I had to choose, Mr. Frodo. I had to come with you. Hey, make sure on your computer that your volume is at 50%. Did you do that?
Yes.
Okay. Boy, these sounds of Moria are powerful. I want to stop right here and talk about some Christian themes. Thankfully, Sam just set us up nicely. I'm reminded of Luke chapter 9, verses 57 through 62, where in the New American Standard Bible, the NASB, it has a heading called Exacting Discipleship. And so here he is with his disciples and people that are following, because Jesus is a superstar at this point. As they were going along the road, someone said to Jesus, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." And he said to another, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father." But he said to him, "Allow the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God." Another also said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first permit me to say goodbye to those at home." But Jesus said to him, "No one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." Remember last time we were talking about Pippin. When they have been defeated by cruel Caradhras, and somebody just mentions going back to Rivendell, and he perks up. "Oh, I want to go." We mentioned this last part of this passage. No one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Compare him, and I'm not beating up on Pippin. Okay, I'm just using him as an example. Compare and contrast Pippin and Sam. What we're seeing Sam doing right now. Another passage in John chapter 6, verses 67 and 68 out of the NASB. "So Jesus said to the 12, 'You do not want to go away also, do you?'" Because people started leaving him. He started saying some hard words that had all these hangers on and all these people that were following him around, hoping for some food, hoping for to see a miracle or what have you. Now he's starting to say some things that are hard, and he's talking about eating his flesh and drinking his blood if you want to have anything to do with him. And they're not understanding what he's saying, and these are hard sayings. How can anybody hear them? And people started going away. So he turns to the 12. "You do not want to go away also, do you?" Simon Peter answered. Simon Peter, or Sam Gamgee, answered, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." One more example, and I think it's even better. Samwise Gamgee as Ruth, the Moabitess. At the beginning of the book of Ruth in the Old Testament, you have Naomi and her husband and their two sons flee Israel, the land of Israel, because of a famine, and they go into the land of the Moabites. And you're not even supposed to do that, okay? But they did, and her husband ends up dying. They were sojourning in Moab. Her husband dies. Her two sons marry Moabite women. Then her two sons die. So it's her and her two daughters-in-law. And then time passes, and she gets word that the famine is over in Israel. She can go back to her home. And so her two daughter-in-laws follow her. And they're going along the way, and as she gets to a certain point, she turns to them and says, "Listen, I love you. I love you dearly. You two are young, and I have no sons for you. Don't follow me. Go back to your father's house and find husbands and live a blessed life." And well, the one daughter-in-law says, "Okay, that makes sense," and she leaves. But Ruth won't leave. She turns to her and says, even if I was pregnant right now, would you wait for those sons to grow up in order to marry? You just go back home. Don't follow me. The Lord has been hard on me." and you need to have a good life. But Ruth says in verses 16 and 17 of Ruth chapter 1, famous passage, we all know this, but listen to this in light of what Sam just said. I had to choose, Mr. Frodo. I had to come with you. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. Don't tell me this anymore. Don't say to go away. Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, Mr. Frodo, I will go. And where you lodge, Mr. Frodo, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, Mr. Frodo, I will die. And there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. Samwise Gamgee. And here's a little spoiler alert and I can't believe that anybody that listens to this show would not already be aware of this. But the professor, Tolkien, has said emphatically that Samwise Gamgee is the hero of The Lord of the Rings. And so from this point on, we have a lot of things we keep tacking on every episode. Hey, let's pay attention to this as we move along. Let's pay attention. Well, from now on, really pay close attention to Sam and how he is behaving in light of Ruth, the Moabitess, or Simon Peter saying to Jesus, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. You are the one that is on the mission. You are the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. Sam says to Frodo, you have the burden of Middle-earth. You're the scape hobbit. Where else can I go? It reminds me of the old hymn, where could I go but to the Lord, living below in this old sinful world, hardly a comfort can afford, striving alone to face temptation so, right? Where could I go but to the Lord? Where could I go, oh, where could I go, seeking a refuge for my soul, needing a friend to save me in the end? Where could I go but to the Lord? Most of us are familiar with that passage. I just thought that this was absolutely profound and beautiful for what we read today. Sam is acting, and he's acting in the best interest of Frodo, even when others are paralyzed with fear. Sam is acting. They heard Gandalf go back down the steps and thrust his staff against the doors. There was a quiver in the stone, and the stairs trembled, but the doors did not open. And of course, I just flipped the page in the Kindle here and just ruined the moment. Well, said the wizard, the passage is blocked behind us now, and there is only one way out on the other side of the mountains. I fear from the sounds that boulders have been piled up, and the trees uprooted and thrown across the gate. I am sorry, for the trees were beautiful and had stood so long. There's J.r.r. Tolkien putting himself in Gandalf.
Yeah.
Right there, huh?
He does that pretty much in all of the characters because,
Yeah.
I mean, aside from orcs and stuff, but the free peoples have a love for the land.
And we've back on when we were doing Middle-earth Minutes, we read a quote from Tolkien where he says, I am a hobbit.
Yes.
And explained all the ways how he is a hobbit. But right now, Gandalf is expressing Professor Tolkien's love, his famous love for trees. I felt that something horrible was near from the moment that my foot first touched the water, said Frodo. What was that thing? Or were there many of them? I do not know, answered Gandalf, but the arms were all guided by one purpose. Something has crept or has been driven out of dark waters under the mountains. Famous quote here, there are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world. What do you think, Micah? Was it one creature or many driven by...
Well, Peter Jackson's version
It was like
leads me to
Cthulhu?
believe... yeah. Since the quote, they were all driven by one purpose, that is a very, poetic and literate way of Tolkien saying, it's a body. And
Okay.
it's not, Gandalf just saying, oh, they're all connected to a body, It's a very poetic way of saying it.
Yeah, I like that theory. He did not speak aloud his thought that whatever it was that dwelt in the lake, it had seized on Frodo first among all the company.
Yes. Now, a question for you is, what do you believe the Watcher in the Water's intent was? Do you think it was told to do that, or do you think it sensed the power of the ring, so it tried to seize that power for itself?
Oh,
Because
goodness.
personally, I'm inclined to believe it wanted the power itself.
Wow.
That, or it just grabbed Frodo because he was the last one.
You just T-boned me. I don't even know how to answer that question. Let's throw that out to the listeners.
Yes, please.
Okay. Let us know what your thoughts are on that profound question. Boromir muttered under his breath, but the echoing stone magnified the sound to a hoarse whisper that all could hear. In the dark places of the world, and thither we are going against my wish. Who will lead us now in this deadly dark? I will, said Gandalf. Oh, I'm sorry. I will, said Gandalf, and Gimli shall walk with me. Follow my staff. As the wizard passed on ahead up the great steps, he held his staff aloft, and from its tip there came a faint radiance. The wide stairway was sound and undamaged. 200 steps they counted, broad and shallow, and at the top they found an arched passage with a level floor leading on into the dark. Let us sit and rest and have something to eat here on the landing, since we can't find a dining room, said Frodo. And he had begun to shake off the terror of the clutching arm, and suddenly he felt extremely hungry. I was tempted to take this scene and compare it to The Last Supper in the upper room, because now they have made their way up steps.
Yeah, that would be another good one.
Yeah. But we'll leave that for listeners to explore on their own. And that would also tie in with that flask from Imladris, the cordial, right? The proposal was welcomed by all, and they sat down on the upper steps, or in the upper room, dim figures in the gloom. After they had eaten, Gandalf gave them each a third sip of the Mirrorvor of Rivendell. That's why I was going to compare and contrast to the Last Supper. It will not last much longer, I'm afraid, he said, but I think we need it after that horror at the gate, and unless we have great luck, we shall need all that is left before we see the other side. Go carefully with the water, too. There are many streams and wells in the mines, but they should not be touched. We may not have a chance of filling our skins and bottles till we come down into Dimril Dell. Where was I? How long is that going to take us? Asked Frodo. I cannot say, answered Gandalf. It depends on many chances. But going straight without mishap or losing our way, we shall take 3 or 4 marches, I expect. It cannot be less than 40 miles from West Door to East Gate in a direct line, and the road may wind much. So, 3 or 4 marches. I threw the question out to our friends on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. How long is a march? Got some great answers. I should have saved them, but I didn't. So I can't credit you guys, but thank you for answering. 15, anywhere from 15 to 25 miles.
Oh, okay.
If you're on good land, straight and flat. So here in the mines of Moria, well, I mean, he's going to really push them if it's 40 miles. It cannot be less than 40 miles, he says. So, 40 divided by 3, that's about how much he expects a march to be.
Yeah.
So what's that going to be? 12, 13, a little over 13 miles a day. After only a brief rest, they started on their way again. All were eager to get the journey over as quickly as possible, and were willing, tired as they were, to go on marching still for several hours. Gandalf walked in front as before. In his left hand he held up the glimmering staff, the light of which just showed the ground before his feet. In his right he held his sword, Glamdring. Glamdring, foehammer or goblin cleaver?
Oh.
I can't remember.
Orcris Goblin Cleaver, I believe. So his would be foehammer.
Okay. Behind him came Gimli, his eyes glinting in the dim light. As he turned his head from side to side, behind the dwarf walked Frodo, and he had drawn the short sword, Sting. No gleam came from the blades of Sting or of Glamdring, and that was some comfort, for being the work of Elvish smiths. In the elder days, these swords shone with a cold light if any orcs were near at hand. Behind Frodo went Sam, and after him Legolas, and the young hobbits, and Boromir. In the dark at the rear, grim and silent, walked Aragorn. We haven't heard anything from Aragorn in a while. In fact, last time we really discussed him, everybody else was freaking out that Gandalf couldn't remember the spell to open the door, but
He was A-okay with it.
Just sitting there. But, there's something going on. Well, he has been saying this foreboding about going into Moria. He knows. He knows something. Or he knows that there's a great possibility of, what's going to happen when we get there. The passage twisted round a few turns and then began to descend. It went steadily down for a long while before it became level once again. The air grew hot and stifling, but it was not foul, and at times they felt currents of cooler air upon their faces issuing from half-guessed openings in the walls. There were many of these. In the pale ray of the wizard's staff, Frodo caught glimpses of stairs and arches and of other passages and tunnels, sloping up or running steeply down or opening blankly dark on either side. It was bewildering beyond hope of remembering. Lotro got that right.
Yep.
Because when I first got into the Mines of Moria, I hadn't the foggiest idea.
No, when you go in the first time, you will not know where you are at all. And that's just such a cool thing.
You like that, huh?
Yes.
Gimli aided Gandalf very little, except by his stout courage. At least he was not, as were most of the others, troubled by the mere darkness in itself. Often the wizard consulted him at points where the choice of way was doubtful, but it was always Gandalf who had the final word. The mines of Moria were vast and intricate beyond the imagination of Gimli, Gloin's son, dwarf of the mountain race though he was. Wow. To Gandalf, the far-off memories of a journey long before were now of little help, but even in the gloom, and despite all windings of the road, he knew whither he wished to go, and he did not falter, as long as there was a path that led towards his goal. "Do not be afraid," said Aragorn. There was a pause, longer than usual, and Gandalf and Gimli were whispering together. The others were crowded behind, waiting anxiously. "Do not be afraid. I've been with him on many a journey. if never on one so dark. And there are tales in Rivendell of greater deeds of his than any that I have seen. He will not go astray if there is any path to find. He has led us in here against our fears, but he will lead us out again at whatever cost to himself. He is surer of finding the way home in a blind night than the cats of Queen Beruthiel.
Did you wiki that?
No.
That's something that we definitely could have talked about, but it would take a little while to
Well-
do off the top of my head. So
Well, but I would imagine that we'll get to that when we get to the histories of Middle Earth and.
of Gondor specifically.
Oh, okay. Hey, sign me up. So now there's some good stuff at Gondor in Book of Lost Tales. But regardless, there was our answer about Aragorn. What was he thinking? What was going on behind those eyes and that silence?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Don't be afraid.
Complete trust.
Fear not, which is exactly what he was, again, going back to the flight to the ford from Weathertop, or the base of Weathertop, we should say, to be more specific, when Frodo was stabbed by the Morgul blade. Don't fear, have hope, trust. If we make it to Elrond's house, his tables will be well laden. So there's something that we could also keep an eye on Aragorn. All the times that he gives these words, this encouragement to trust, to hope, right?
Well, yeah, it's not spoilers for ahead, and I mean, obviously, pretty much anyone listening to this is a huge fan of the
Right.
series. So the King's healing, when-
King's Fort. Oh, the hands of the healer?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that really reflects in not only, his ability to bring people back,
Right.
but also to
The
speak
hands of the
comfort.
king are the hands of a healer.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I can't wait till we get to that in the houses of healing. Yeah, that was a big spoiler. No, because if you don't know what we're talking about, you don't know what we're talking about,
Exactly.
because that wasn't in the film.
And you'll forget by the time we get there, because
Right.
it'll be in like 10 years.
And we'll forget too. Okay. It was well for the company that they had such a guide. They had no fuel nor any means of making torches. In the desperate scramble at the doors, many things had been left behind, but without any light, they would soon have come to grief. There were not only many roads to choose from, there were also, in many places, holes and pitfalls, and dark wells beside the path in which their passing feet echoed. There were fissures and chasms in the walls and floor, and every now and then a crack would open right before their feet. The widest was more than 7 feet across, and it was long before Pippin could summon enough courage to leap over the dreadful gap. The noise of churning water came up from far below, as if some great mill wheel was churning in the depths. That reminds me of Pippin's reaction, basically, when he was perking up. Oh, go back to Rivendell, right? Because what did Elrond tell him? Hey, this is no job for the likes of you. Nothing personal. It's just, and that's what he's thinking right now. This is no, what am I doing here?
A hobbit can't leap 7 feet?
No, absolutely not. Rope, muttered Sam. I knew I'd want it if I hadn't got it. As these dangers became more frequent, their march became slower. Already they seemed to have been tramping on, endlessly to the mountain's roots. They were more than weary. And yet there seemed no comfort in the thought of halting anywhere. Frodo's spirits had risen for a while after his escape and after food and a draught of the cordial, but now a deep uneasiness, growing to dread, crept over him again. Though he had been healed in Rivendell of the knife stroke, that grim wound had not been without effect. His senses were sharper and more aware of things that could not be seen. One sign of a change that he soon had noticed was that he could see more in the dark than any of his companions, save perhaps Gandalf. And he was in any case the bearer of the ring. It hung upon its chain against his breast, and at whiles it seemed a heavy weight. He felt the certainty of evil ahead and of evil following, but he said nothing. He gripped tighter on the hilt of his sword and went on doggedly. The company behind him spoke seldom, and then only in hurried whispers. There was no sound but the sound of their own feet and the dull stump of Gimli the dwarf's Gimli dwarf's boots, the heavy tread of Boromir, the light step of Legolas, the soft, scarce heard patter of hobbit feet, and in the rear the slow, firm footfalls of Aragorn with his long stride. When they halted for a moment, they heard nothing at all, unless it were occasionally a faint trickle and drip of unseen water. Yet Frodo began to hear, or to imagine that he heard something else, like the faint fall of soft bare feet. It was never loud enough or near enough for him to feel certain that he heard it, but once it had started, it never stopped while the company was moving. But it was not an echo. For when they halted, it pattered on for a little all by itself and then grew still. It was after nightfall when they had entered the mines. They had been going for several hours, with only brief halts, when Gandalf came to his first serious check. Before him stood a wide, dark arch opening into 3 passages. All led in the same general direction, eastward, but the left-hand passage plunged down, while the right hand climbed up, and the middle way seemed to run on, smooth and level, but very narrow. "I have no memory of this place at all," said Gandalf, standing uncertainly under the arch. He held up his staff in the hopes of finding some marks or inscription that might help his choice, but nothing of the kind was to be seen. "I am too weary to decide," he said, shaking his head. "And I expect that you are all as weary as I am, or wearier. We had better halt here for what is left of the night. You know what I mean. In here, it is ever dark. But outside, the late moon is riding westward, and the middle night has passed." "Poor old Bill," said Sam. "I wonder where he is. I hope those wolves haven't gotten him yet." To the left of the great arch, they found a stone door. It was half closed, but swung back easily to a gentle thrust. Beyond, there seemed to lie a wide chamber cut in the rock. "Steady, steady," cried Gandalf, as Merry and Pippin pushed forward, glad to find a place where they could rest with at least more feeling of shelter than in the open passage. "Steady. You do not know what is inside it yet. I will go first." He went in cautiously, and the others filed behind. "There," he said, pointing with his staff to the middle of the floor. Before his feet, they saw a large round hole like the mouth of a well. Broken and rusty chains lay at the edge and trailed down into the black pit. Fragments of stone lay near. "One of you might have fallen in and still be wondering when you were going to strike the bottom," said Aragorn to Merry. "Let the guide go first while you have one. There's some wisdom."
And a bit of foreboding.
Yep. "This seems to have been a guard room made for the watching of the 3 passages," said Gimli. "That hole was plainly a well for the guard's use, covered with a stone lid. But the lid is broken, and we must all take care in the dark." Pippin felt curiously attracted by the well. While the others were unrolling blankets and making beds against the walls of the chamber as far as possible from the hole in the floor, he crept to the edge and peered over. A chill air seemed to strike his face, rising from the invisible depths. Moved by a sudden impulse, he groped for a loose stone and let it drop. He felt his heart beat many times before there was any sound. Then far below, as if the stone had fallen into deep water in some cavernous place, there came a plunk. Very distant, but magnified and repeated in the hollow shaft. "What's that?" cried Gandalf. He was relieved when Pippin confessed what he had done, but he was angry, and Pippin could see his eye glinting.
Fool of a took!
He growled. "This is a serious journey, not a hobbit walking party. Throw yourself in next time, and then you will be no further nuisance. Now be quiet." Nothing more was heard for several minutes, but then there came out of the depths faint knocks. Tum-tap. Tap-tum. They stopped. And when the echoes had died away, they were repeated. Tap-tum, tum-tap, tap-tap, tum. They sounded disquietingly like signals of some sort, but after a while the knocking died away and was not heard again. "That was the sound of a hammer, or I have never heard one," said Gimli. "Yes," said Gandalf, "and I do not like it. It may have nothing to do with Peregrine's foolish stone, but probably something has been disturbed that would have been better left quiet. Pray, do nothing of the kind again. Let us hope we shall get some rest without further trouble. You, Pippin, can go on the first watch as a reward," he growled, and rolled himself in a blanket. Pippin sat miserably by the door in the pitch dark, but he kept on turning round, fearing that some unknown thing would crawl up from out of the well. He wished he could cover the hole, if only with a blanket, but he dared not move or go near it, even though Gandalf seemed to be asleep. Actually, Gandalf was awake, though lying still and silent. He was deep in thought, trying to recall every memory of his former journey in the mines, and considering anxiously the next course that he should take. A false turn now might be disastrous. After an hour, he rose up and came over to Pippin. "Get into a corner and have a sleep, my lad," he said in a kindly tone. "You want to sleep, I expect. I cannot get a wink, so I may as well do the watching." "I don't know. I know what is the matter with me," he muttered. "Oh, I know what is the matter with me," he muttered as he sat down by the door. "I need smoke. I have not tasted it since the morning before the snowstorm." That's a very British colloquialism, because I'm recalling one of Tolkien's letters to Christopher Tolkien, and he was complaining that his mini keg in the house was dry. He says, I haven't tasted beer since Tuesday." So here's Gandalf. This is another Tolkien Gandalf. They may have a lot in common. The last thing that Pippin saw as sleep took him was a dark glimpse of the old wizard huddled on the floor, shielding a glowing chip in his gnarled hands between his knees. The flicker for a moment showed his sharp nose and the puff of smoke. It was Gandalf who roused them all from sleep. He had sat and watched all alone for about 6 hours and had let the others rest. "And in the watches I have made up my mind," he said. "I do not like the feel of the middle way, and I do not like the smell of the left-hand way. There's a foul air down there, or I am no guide. I shall take the right-hand passage. It is time we began to climb up again." For 8 dark hours, not counting 2 brief halts, they marched on. And they met no danger, and heard nothing, and saw nothing but the faint gleam of the wizard's light, bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp in front of them. The passage they had chosen wound steadily upwards. As far as they could judge, it went in great mounting curves, and as it rose, it grew loftier and wider. There were now no openings to other galleries or tunnels on either side, and the floor was level and sound, without pits or cracks. Evidently, they had struck what once had been an important road, and they went forward quicker than they had done on their first march. In this way, they advanced some 15 miles, measured in a direct line east, though they must have actually walked 20 miles or more. As the road climbed upwards, Frodo's spirits rose a little. But he still felt oppressed, and still at times he heard, or thought he heard, away behind the company and beyond the fall and patter of their feet, a following footstep that was not an echo. They had marched as far as the hobbits could endure without a rest, and all were thinking of a place where they could sleep, when suddenly the walls to the right and left vanished. They seemed to have passed through some arched doorway into a black and empty space. There was a great draught of warmer air behind them, and before them the darkness was cold on their faces. They halted and crowded anxiously together. Gandalf seemed pleased. "I chose the right way," he said. "At least we are coming to the habitable parts, and I guess that we are not far now from the eastern side. But we are high up, a good deal higher than the Dimrill Gate, unless I am mistaken. From the feeling of the air, we must be in a wide hall. I will now risk a little real light." He raised his staff, and for a brief instant there was a blaze like a flash of lightning. Great shadows sprang up and fled, and for a second they saw a vast roof far above their heads, upheld by many mighty pillars hewn of stone. Before them and on either side stretched a huge empty hall. Its black walls, polished and smooth as glass, flashed and glittered. 3 other entrances they saw, dark black arches, one straight before them eastward and one on either side. Then the light went out. "That is all that I shall venture on for the present," said Gandalf. "There used to be great windows in the mountainside and shafts leading out to the light in the upper reaches of the mines. I think we have reached them now, but it is night outside again, and we cannot tell until morning. If I am right, tomorrow we may actually see the morning peeping in. But in the meanwhile, we had better go no further. Let us rest, if we can. Things have gone well so far, and the greater part of the dark road is over. But we are not through yet, and it is a long way down to the gates that open on the world."
You need say no more. We'd best get a move on. There are still goblins about.
Oh, bother. More mountains?
No, don't you see? The sun is setting in the west, behind the mountains. We're on the other side, to the edge of the land beyond.
I think we covered a bunch of ground.
We did, actually.
Okay.
That was a great end.
Yep. I wanted to go a little bit further, but it'll work out. Next week we'll start off with some music, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to that. Listeners, which part of this part of the chapter, here, part 2 of A Journey in the Dark, which part stood out to you and why? There's a lot of good stuff to chew on in what we read today. Somebody needs to run with that theme of the Last Supper in the upper room. You know, as soon as we got up the stairs on that first landing, I had to let that go by because I just thought that the point on Sam was so important, you know, in light of Sam's importance of the story. Great stuff. It was nice to see Gandalf show a little bit of tenderness to Pippin after, right? Call him my lad. Good stuff in there. And obviously, the movies are deviated quite a bit from the text, just mixing and matching and combining things.
Yeah.
But let us know. We'll give you all the ways to contact us in just a few moments. But first, there's a bunch of... We got to clean up... What is all this?
What on earth are these?
Replies to the party invitations.
Good gracious.
Good gracious, we did get replies to the party invitations, and in
Good.
fact, we received a voicemail. In fact, on the day that we released the last podcast episode, we heard from somebody. I don't believe that we have heard from John before, so let us share his voicemail with all y'all.
Hi, Secret Fire podcast guys. This is John calling you from beautiful St. Paul, Minnesota. Really enjoyed the latest episode about A Journey in the Dark, Part 1. And as I've been following the priest, prophet, and king, as you have so well, it got me thinking that Gandalf in this chapter, you were speaking on the last episode about how he doesn't usually show his power, but most of the time he's sort of, inflaming hearts and encouraging people to be their best selves. And I thought how like that is all of the prophets of Israel, that they weren't there necessarily to predict the future all the time or do great deeds all the time, but really to call the people of God back to who it is that God wanted them to be. And that seems to be Gandalf's role, let's say 95% of the time in The Lord of the Rings. But then there's that other 5% of the time where the miracles do seem necessary. So either if it's him growing as, tall as a tree and lighting those wargs on fire, or Elijah calling down fire from heaven, those moments in the Old Testament are so rare when a prophet performs a miracle, but sometimes so necessary for the moment. So I'm just going to have sort of an added interest in tracking that throughout the novel, sort of when is Gandalf encouraging and when is he actually sort of showing forth that power that was granted to him by the Valar. Anyway, love the show. Keep it up. Was so happy to see an episode in my feed this morning. Devoured it on the way to work and on the way back from work. And you guys keep us thinking. Appreciate it. Continued prayers for you. Keep up the good work. Bye.
John, thank you so much.
Yes, that's a really interesting way of looking at that. I've never really looked at it from that perspective, where this power was granted to him rather than, modern times when someone's a magic user, they have this powerful artifact that gives them this power and stuff. But right. Yeah, I really like that.
Yes, and he hit the nail on the proverbial head, talking about, what did the prophets of old, how did they actually operate? Yeah, there are fantastic miracles taking place. In fact, people being raised from the dead. And Brendan and I, on our other podcast, Finding Christ in Cinema, on today's episode, the one we recorded today, we were talking about Star Wars The Last Jedi. And we were having a discussion about the prophet Elijah, and he did some fantastic miracles, but that was not the norm. That's not what they were to do. They were to speak the words of Yahweh to the people of Israel, and they were to encourage. It gets to the final of the great prophets was John the Baptizer, and he came as Malachi described in chapter 3 of Malachi, that John would come in order to turn the hearts of the father towards the sons and the hearts of the son towards the fathers. It was encouragement, and so great voicemail. Thank you so much, John, and welcome to the fellowship, and we hope to hear from you a lot more in the future. Going along with that, I did remember that patron saint Michael Potter, the Ranger of the North, sent us a message on Twitter after the last episode. He said, so nice to have a new episode. Very well done. My favorite is the commentary on the role of Gandalf as inspiring/encouraging Middle-earth people, not being a Superman. Makes the story and character more endearing. Mm-hmm. So we're all on the same page there. And Michael Potter, thank you for patron saint, Michael. He's a patron saint because he supports the ongoing work here on Secret Fire Podcast and the GCT Network. We're all on the same page. It's fantastic stuff. Now, the other day, we received a message on Facebook. Boy, we have a lot of different places where people can message, and I have to admit, I'm terrible at collecting them all in one place. Now, when we get voicemail, that's easy. Email, that's easy. Comments on the blog, that's easy. When it gets to Twitter and Facebook and stuff, I forget. I know somebody said something somewhere. Where was that? And then I have to go hunting. But anyway, Kathleen Becker sent us, it was a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/secretfirepodcast. And she says, I've read Lord of the Rings so many times since I was young. I found your podcast and was fascinated. I'm delighted to have a new way to look at one of my favorite series. I'm a little behind still working my way through many meetings because I am rereading yet again as I go through it, and the rest of life sometimes gets in the way. Boy, don't we know that as the producers
Sure
of this of this show. I just wanted to share that the moment in many meetings where Frodo finally sees Bilbo has never before hit me like it did when I was listening to your podcast. I had seen the parallels with heaven in the past, but for some reason it hit me forcibly how beautiful that moment was. It made me consider those with whom we might ourselves be looking forward to being reunited. It made me tear up a bit, truthfully, but in a joyful kind of way. I have always loved even the title of The Last Homely House. It's so evocative, even without the description. Absolutely brilliant and beautiful. It makes me picture peace and contentment in all its forms. Thanks again for helping me to think harder and really appreciate Tolkien's writing anew, both you and your commenters. And then there's an addendum. She added, oh, by the way, I was thinking it's very interesting that both Tolkien and Lewis have written mountaintop experiences into their stories. For C.S. Lewis, it was a literal mountaintop. Aslan's country is at the top of the highest mountain at the end of the world, but Tolkien goes the complete opposite direction and puts his in a valley with Rivendell. Great thoughts. And I have no idea what we said on that show when Frodo met Bilbo. I'll have to go back and listen to that.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in knowing what we said, to be honest with you. So, Kathleen Becker, thank you so much. And again, welcome to the fellowship. Stay in touch. Stick with us. And that's about all that we have as far as listener feedback this go around. Again, we'll give you all the ways to contact us here in just a few moments. But, okay, party tree time. Micah, where have we been for a month? Can I say?
Okay, go ahead.
My son, Micah, my co-host, my co-producer, my Middle-earth friend and companion, graduated from high school. Yay! Yeah, it's amazing.
Who is that odd little fellow?
Well, that's my son, Micah.
You can't say that now. I'm graduating. And now I get to go to school in a couple months again.
Yes. Well, so we had the last few weeks have just been jam-packed with rehearsals and ceremonies and this party and that party and this thing, you know, like at the church when they did the... What do you call that? What do they call that?
It's just a graduation celebration.
Yeah, where they
friends.
honored all the high school graduates, well, and college graduates as well, and lots of things going on, and birthdays going on over here, and all that good stuff. So, here's the thing. Next week, Micah, everybody in the family, except for me, are going to California for a week.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll put a kink in it. I don't know if we'll be able to record maybe next Thursday or so, because Brendan wants to come into the studio next week and record it.
You and Brendan can do it without me, surely.
I don't know. I don't know about that. But anyway, soon we will get back on track, and I think that we're going to try and go for an every other week schedule.
Okay.
So Brendan and I want to alternate the two podcasts that we do together. Because plus Brendan does radio shows in his town, I do radio shows in our town, and there's just a whole lot of production going on. There's much producing taking place between all of us, and so we're just trying to get into a groove here. Another thing that I want to tell everybody I want your feedback on and your ideas is that Micah and I have been talking a lot about, not in depth, but I'll mention it and, hey, think about this and what can we do with this. And we're considering doing some extra video some behind the scenes things here at the studio or here at our house, behind the scenes dealing with Middle Earth and Tolkien things and stuff like that. So either maybe like a behind the scenes or maybe like a vlog style, a day in the life of a father and son Middle Earth podcasting team or something. And I'm considering doing these short things. My inclination is to do them for our patron saints. So anybody that supports us on Patreon, patreon.com/GCTN is the link there. And we don't have like different tier things there. We're just anything that anybody can support us with, whether it's a cup of coffee a month or whether it's a Happy Meal a month or a pizza per month, basically, we'll release these videos for patron saints, and that way they can get to know us a little bit better. Because people that are willing to support, a podcast or video producers or whatever anybody's doing on Patreon, that's a different kind of a level of interest. Those are people that if you support somebody, you really care about what they're doing, and it's nice to get to know them a little bit better. That's just a consideration. I do want to do videos. I don't know if I should put it behind that wall at Patreon. I feel that if we do that, we can be even more open, more
put stuff out more often.
Well, but be more. Why am I'm old? Okay, I'm old. What's wrong with my brain? But be more open. You know what I mean. Whoop! Hitting the microphone now that I'm talking with my hands. Transparent, I guess. I don't know. Let you into the house and into the studio, and then even into Micah's bedroom. He's got some cool stuff in there. And, you got that great thing for that rug, that blanket.
Oh yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah,
maybe put a picture on Twitter or something.
Yeah, things like that. So let us know what your thoughts are on that, and get back to us. So anyway, next time it's A Journey in the Dark, Part 3. But before we leave, we have party invitations to send out. The Secret Fire podcast is live in the GCT Network studio whenever we are actually live in the studio. We'll send out notifications when we're broadcasting on our Twitch page.
The best way to get notified when we're live in the studio is via Twitter at Secret Firecast. And you can join us on the Arkenstone server in Lord of the Rings Online at lotro.com.
Yes, you send all email to secretfire@gctnetwork.com or call the Hobbit hotline at 507-407-GCTN or the backup hotline that's in Crick Hollow. Fatty Bulger's standing by at 507-407-4286. You can subscribe to the Secret Fire podcast in your favorite podcatchers, your podcast apps, whether that's the iTunes or Apple, whatever they call it now, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, or any of them. Search them all for the Secret Fire podcast. Our theme song, Hobbit's Dance, is from the album Memories of Middle-earth by Brobdingnagian Bards. Find out more about them and buy all the music on their website at thebards.net. To find out more about the Secret Fire podcast, as well as our other shows, including Finding Christ in Cinema and The Theonauts, visit our main website at gctnetwork.com. If you like the Secret Fire podcast, please share it with your friends and review the show in iTunes. If you love the Secret Fire podcast, please become a patron saint and sustaining member of the fellowship on our Patreon page at patreon.com/GCTN. And until next time, we regret to tell you...
I regret to announce this is the end. I'm going now. I bid you all a very fond farewell.
Farewell. Goodbye.
Don't throw me a loop like that.
You say whatever you want. Welcome.
Good
Aloha. It was tied to a stone.
Big dwarven kingdom.
All righty. There we go. And that was it. That was the show for today. If you watched that live, thank you very much for joining us. If you're seeing this after the fact on Twitch, we also upload these videos to our YouTube channel. You'll just have to search for the Secret Fire Podcast on YouTube. And that's it. Over and out. Goodbye.